Richard Feynman was more than just a brilliant physicist. He was a curious mind that saw the world through a unique lens. Born in 1918, Feynman grew up in New York City, where his insatiable curiosity and knack for problem-solving began to emerge early in life. His achievements in quantum mechanics earned him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1965, but his legacy extends far beyond his scientific contributions. Feynman's true brilliance wasn't just in solving the equations of the universe, it was in how he approached life and learning. Feynman was famous for his unorthodox methods. Rather than memorizing complex theories or relying on established knowledge, he preferred to break things down to their simplest components. His intellectual journey was driven by a childlike curiosity that asked why and how more than what. This led to revolutionary discoveries in physics, most notably his work on quantum electrodynamics, for which he received the Nobel Prize. But Feynman wasn't just known for his work in the lab. He was also a charismatic teacher and lecturer, captivating students and audiences with his energy, wit, and playful attitude. His approach to education was unconventional, yet profoundly effective. He believed that understanding something deeply meant being able to explain it in the simplest terms, a principle that would later become a cornerstone of his famous Feynman Technique. Feynman's personality was just as colorful as his intellectual prowess. He was known for his irreverent humor, bongo playing skills, and a personality that could light up any room. Yet it was his relentless pursuit of understanding and his habit of questioning everything that set him apart from his peers and made him a legend in both the scientific community and popular culture. The concept of genius is often associated with natural talent, a trait that some people are simply born with. But Richard Feynman's story challenges this myth. While he was undoubtedly brilliant, his genius didn't come from some magical inborn ability. Instead, Feynman's brilliance came from his extraordinary approach to thinking, questioning, and learning. Feynman was a firm believer that intelligence is something that can be cultivated, not something inherent. His journey to greatness wasn't about being smarter than others. It was about being more curious and willing to put in the work to understand things deeply. His academic achievements were the result of hard work, unconventional thinking, and a mindset that valued understanding over memorization. In his early career, Feynman made a name for himself by solving problems that other physicists thought were unsolvable, but what made his approach so unique was his ability to simplify complex ideas. Instead of relying on the standard, formulaic ways of thinking in his field, he would break down theories and problems to their core principles and build his understanding from there. This approach not only allowed him to find innovative solutions, but it also helped him see patterns that others missed. Feynman's intellectual humility was another key factor in his success. He wasn't afraid to admit when he didn't know something. In fact, he reveled in the challenge of confronting the unknown. Instead of shying away from complex ideas, he tackled them head-on, always seeking to understand them from the ground up. The message here is clear. Genius isn't about innate talent. It's about curiosity, persistence, and the willingness to question everything you think you know. Feynman's genius was rooted in his commitment to learning and understanding, a lesson that anyone can apply to their own intellectual journey. One of the most remarkable things about Richard Feynman was his mental clarity. He wasn't just a genius in the sense that he could solve difficult equations or prove complex theories. He was a genius because he could see through the noise and confusion that often surrounds difficult concepts. This ability to simplify the complex and clarify the unclear was at the heart of his scientific breakthroughs and intellectual success. Feynman often talked about how the key to his success wasn't about mastering complicated formulas or memorizing endless facts. It was about understanding the core principles of a problem. He believed that if you could strip away all the unnecessary complexity and see the problem from a basic, fundamental perspective, it would reveal the solution in a much clearer way. His approach to understanding physics was not based on memorization, but on seeing the essence of the problem and how it fit into the bigger picture. The ability to simplify was central to Feynman's method. He would often take the most complicated problems and break them down into their most basic components, making them easier to understand. Whether it was a complex equation or a theoretical concept, Feynman could always see it from a different angle and break it down to its simplest form. This ability to simplify is what set him apart from many of his peers. While others were bogged down by the complexity of problems, Feynman focused on the basics, which gave him the mental clarity to solve them. One of Feynman's famous quotes is, "If you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it." This idea encapsulates his entire approach to learning and problem solving. Feynman believed that true understanding came from being able to explain a concept in simple, clear language. When he couldn't do that, he knew he hadn't fully grasped the idea yet. This focus on simplicity helped him achieve a level of mental clarity that many others lacked. Feynman's mental clarity wasn't just a natural gift, it was the result of his conscious effort to break down problems, understand their essence, and simplify them. This is the kind of clarity that leads to breakthroughs, both in science and in life. And it's something that anyone can develop by adopting Feynman's approach to thinking and learning. Richard Feynman's brilliance wasn't just about his intellectual prowess or groundbreaking discoveries. It was about his approach to thinking. One of the most profound habits Feynman relied on throughout his career was the Feynman Technique. This simple yet incredibly powerful method is centered around the idea that the best way to understand something is to explain it in the simplest terms possible, as though teaching it to someone with no background in the subject. The Feynman Technique is broken down into 4 steps. Choose a concept. Start by picking a topic or concept you want to learn or understand better. This could be anything from quantum mechanics to a complex project at work. Teach it in simple terms. Write down everything you know about the concept and explain it as if you're teaching it to a child. Use plain language, simple analogies, and avoid jargon. Identify gaps in understanding. As you try to explain the topic simply, you'll inevitably hit areas where your knowledge isn't quite clear. These gaps are crucial because they show you where you need to deepen your understanding. Review and simplify. Go back to the source material, fill in the gaps, and refine your explanation. Make sure you can explain the concept clearly and without confusion. This process continues until you can explain the topic in the simplest way possible. This technique works because it forces you to confront what you don't understand. It's not enough to regurgitate information. You must actively engage with the material and truly grasp it. By simplifying complex ideas, you break them down into their core principles, making them easier to comprehend, remember, and apply. The Feynman technique doesn't just help with understanding, it helps you retain and use knowledge long term. At first glance, it might seem counterintuitive to simplify a concept to gain a deeper understanding. After all, complexity often feels synonymous with depth. But Richard Feynman knew that simplicity wasn't about dumbing down ideas. It was about clearing away the clutter and focusing on what truly matters. When you simplify something, you break it down into its most fundamental components. This process is like cleaning up a cluttered desk. You remove everything that's unnecessary, leaving only what's essential. For example, in physics, Feynman would take highly complex theories and distill them into basic, intuitive ideas. By stripping away the technical jargon and intricate mathematics, he could see the underlying principles more clearly. This approach aligns with cognitive science, which suggests that the brain works best when it's not overloaded with unnecessary information. When presented with complex, jargon-heavy material, the brain can struggle to make connections and remember key concepts. But when the information is simplified, it becomes easier to process and understand. This reduction in cognitive load makes the learning process smoother, faster, and more effective. The Feynman technique works because it forces you to approach knowledge in a way that highlights clarity. Instead of memorizing facts or equations, you actively work to understand the core concepts. And when you can explain something clearly, you've achieved a deeper level of understanding. In short, simplicity is not about cutting corners, it's about focusing on the essence of a concept. Feynman's genius lay in his ability to take complex ideas and make them accessible. By applying the Feynman technique, you can do the same, and in turn gain greater mental clarity. While Richard Feynman used the technique primarily in his work as a physicist, the Feynman technique is a tool that anyone can use in any field, whether it's science, business, or personal development. The beauty of the technique is its simplicity. It's a universal method that helps break down complex ideas and make them more accessible, no matter what context you're applying them to. For example, imagine you're working in marketing and need to develop a strategy for a new product launch. You might start by breaking down the key features of the product and then simplifying the messaging. Instead of using complicated industry terms, you could explain the product's benefits in simple terms, focusing on how it solves a specific problem for the target customer. This makes it easier for your team to understand the product's value and communicate it effectively to potential customers. In the world of business, the Feynman technique can also be used to simplify complex concepts like financial reports or performance metrics. Rather than getting bogged down by technical jargon, take the time to explain the numbers in plain language. What does each metric mean? What action should be taken based on the results? By using simple terms and analogies, you can ensure that everyone in the company, whether they have a financial background or not, understands the data and can act on it. The Feynman technique is also invaluable for students. Imagine studying a subject like calculus, which might seem intimidating at first. Instead of simply memorizing formulas, you could apply the Feynman technique to break down each equation into its fundamental principles. By teaching yourself the concept in simple terms, you'll be able to retain the information better and apply it more easily when solving problems. Even in personal development, the Feynman technique can be used to simplify complex ideas about psychology, relationships, or personal growth. Instead of getting lost in abstract theories, focus on understanding the core concepts and explain them to yourself in a way that makes sense. The more you simplify, the more you'll understand, and the more effectively you'll apply that understanding in real-life situations. The Feynman technique is not just for academics. It's a practical tool that can be applied to almost anything, making complex subjects easier to grasp and use in your everyday life. One of the most valuable aspects of the Feynman technique is its ability to simplify complex concepts, which is particularly helpful in everyday life when faced with overwhelming information or tasks. Whether it's a new project at work, a challenging piece of reading, or an issue in your personal life, the Feynman technique provides a methodical approach to break things down into understandable components. Start by identifying the core problem or concept that's causing confusion. For example, if you're learning a new piece of software at work, the concept might seem daunting due to its many features and functions. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, break the software down into manageable chunks. Focus on understanding just one feature at a time, like the interface, how to input data, or how to save files. Once you've understood one component, move to the next. The Feynman technique encourages you to explain each piece to yourself or even to someone else as if you were teaching it to a child. The process of explaining forces you to simplify the concept and identify gaps in your understanding. When you try to explain something simply and can't quite find the right words, you've pinpointed an area where your knowledge needs further development. This revelation often leads to deeper learning because you're actively filling in the gaps instead of passively reading or listening. The same principle applies to life situations. Let's say you're planning a large event, such as a wedding or a birthday party. The task might seem overwhelming at first. Instead of trying to tackle everything all at once, break the event planning down into simpler tasks: venue selection, guest list, food and catering, decorations, etc. Then explain each task in simple terms. What needs to happen first? What's the most essential element? By simplifying and explaining each task, you create a clear roadmap that removes the chaos and helps you approach the project with confidence. Breaking down complex ideas and tasks using the Feynman technique doesn't just help with understanding, it makes them easier to accomplish by ensuring that each part is tackled step by step. The Feynman technique isn't just useful for simplifying problems, it's also an excellent tool for mastering new subjects or skills. The process of breaking a subject down into simple, explainable components allows for deeper understanding, making it easier to learn new concepts and retain them in the long term. This approach is especially beneficial when you're trying to get a strong grasp on something unfamiliar, whether it's a new area of work, a hobby, or an academic subject. When learning something new, we often struggle because the material seems vast or complicated. Whether you're learning a new language, a musical instrument, or a technical subject like programming or engineering, the Feynman technique helps you approach these challenges with a fresh perspective. Instead of getting bogged down and trying to understand everything at once, focus on the basics and build from there. For example, if you're learning a new language, the first step is to focus on learning the fundamental vocabulary and grammar. Instead of getting overwhelmed by fluency or complex sentences, start by breaking down simple phrases. Try to explain them to yourself in basic terms. This is how I say hello in this language, or this word means food. Through this process of simplification, you not only understand the meanings of words, but also how they fit into the larger structure of the language. Similarly, in a technical subject like programming, begin by mastering the basic commands or concepts: what variables are, how loops work, and what functions do. Once you've broken down these basic building blocks, try explaining them as if you're teaching someone with no programming knowledge. When you can do this, you've gained a solid understanding that will allow you to approach more advanced topics with greater ease. Mastering new subjects doesn't have to be intimidating. By applying the Feynman technique and simplifying the material, you can make learning more accessible and enjoyable. As you build on the basics, you'll notice how quickly your understanding deepens, allowing you to advance with confidence. The Feynman technique is not just for learning new subjects. It's a highly effective method for solving problems. Whether you're dealing with a work-related challenge, a personal issue, or a difficult decision, breaking down the problem into smaller components allows you to identify the root causes and come up with actionable solutions. The beauty of the Feynman technique is that it encourages active engagement with the problem, which leads to deeper insights and more creative solutions. When faced with a problem, the first step is to break it down into its core components. Let's say you're working on a project with multiple stakeholders. The project may seem overwhelming because of the many moving parts, budget constraints, timelines, and varying opinions. Rather than tackling all aspects at once, start by breaking down the problem into manageable sections. Identify the main objectives, the key deliverables, and any roadblocks you're encountering. Once you've identified the pieces, explain them to yourself in simple terms. The objective of this project is to deliver on time with a set budget. The roadblock is the delayed feedback from stakeholders. Next, apply the Feynman technique by explaining each part of the problem in even simpler terms. This forces you to clarify your thinking and eliminate confusion. For example, if you're facing difficulties with communication between team members, explain the issue in its simplest form. We're not communicating effectively because there's a lack of regular check-ins. This simplified explanation highlights the root cause of the problem, allowing you to address it directly. In addition to simplifying the problem, the Feynman technique can help you identify patterns and connections you may have missed. As you break down each aspect of the problem, you might notice underlying trends or recurring issues that need to be addressed. For instance, you may realize that poor communication isn't the only issue. It's also linked to a lack of clear expectations at the beginning of the project. This insight can guide your solution strategy, helping you focus on the most critical factors. The Feynman technique is also valuable in creative problem solving. If you're facing a creative challenge, whether it's coming up with ideas for a marketing campaign or solving a design issue, start by simplifying the problem and explaining it in the clearest terms possible. This approach can often lead to breakthrough insights and innovative solutions. By using the Feynman technique to simplify complex problems, you're not just finding solutions, you're developing a deeper understanding of the problem itself, which leads to more effective, sustainable solutions. Cognitive load theory, developed by John Sweller, helps explain why the Feynman technique is so effective in improving understanding and mental clarity. Essentially, cognitive load refers to the amount of mental effort required to process information. The human brain has a limited capacity for processing information at any given moment. When too much information is presented at once, or when the information is overly complex, it can overwhelm our cognitive system, making it difficult to retain and understand. When we try to process a complex concept, the brain struggles to integrate all the different pieces of information at once. This is known as extraneous cognitive load. In contrast, when we simplify the concept and strip away unnecessary details, we reduce the cognitive load, making it easier for the brain to focus on the core elements of the information. The Feynman technique works by minimizing cognitive load. By breaking down a concept into its simplest components, you reduce the mental strain on your working memory. This process allows you to focus on the key elements, leading to clearer thinking and better retention. For example, when learning a new scientific theory, Feynman would strip away the technical jargon and reframe the idea in simple, relatable terms. This method not only alleviates the cognitive burden, but also enhances comprehension, making the material easier to internalize and recall later. By reducing extraneous cognitive load and focusing only on the essentials, the Feynman technique helps improve mental clarity. This is particularly important when dealing with complex topics, as it allows your brain to process and retain the information in a more efficient way, ensuring that the knowledge becomes deeply embedded. One of the most powerful cognitive strategies for improving learning and memory is active recall. Active recall involves actively retrieving information from memory rather than passively reviewing it. Research in cognitive psychology shows that actively recalling information strengthens neural connections and enhances long-term retention. When you challenge yourself to retrieve knowledge from memory, it forces the brain to engage deeply with the material, which leads to a better understanding and improved ability to apply the knowledge in the future. The Feynman technique naturally incorporates active recall into its process. When you explain a concept in simple terms, you are not just passively reading or listening to the material. You are actively engaging with it by putting it into your own words and trying to teach it to others. This act of explaining the concept forces you to recall and organize the information from memory, testing your understanding and revealing any gaps or areas where your knowledge may be incomplete. For instance, imagine you're learning about the concept of energy conservation in physics. Instead of simply reading the textbook, you try to explain it aloud as if teaching someone who knows nothing about physics. In doing so, you are actively recalling the laws of energy conservation and organizing them into a coherent explanation. If you struggle to explain a part of the concept, that's a sign that you need to revisit the material and strengthen your understanding. Active recall helps solidify your knowledge and makes it more likely that you'll remember the information when you need it. The Feynman technique amplifies this process by requiring you to take the extra step of simplifying and teaching the material, which leads to deeper engagement and long-term retention. Mental models are powerful cognitive tools that help us simplify and make sense of the world. They are frameworks for understanding how different concepts or systems work, enabling us to make better decisions, solve problems, and think more clearly. Mental models help us connect new information with what we already know, and they allow us to view complex situations from multiple perspectives. The Feynman technique is essentially a method for creating and refining mental models. When you break down a complex concept and explain it in simple terms, you are not just memorizing facts, you are constructing a mental model of that concept. By simplifying the information and teaching it to yourself or others, you create a mental map that helps you understand how different ideas or parts fit together. This process allows you to internalize knowledge in a way that makes it easier to recall and apply to new situations. For example, let's say you are studying economics and learning about the supply and demand model. Rather than memorizing graphs or equations, you might break down the core principles, how price affects supply, how demand fluctuates based on consumer behavior, and how market equilibrium works. By simplifying these concepts and explaining them in your own words, you build a mental model of how supply and demand interact. This mental model serves as a tool that helps you understand not only economics, but also how other markets work or how business decisions are made. Feynman was known for his ability to simplify complex ideas by creating mental models that made the subject matter clearer. He used this technique to understand everything from physics to everyday life. These mental models didn't just help him solve problems, they allowed him to see patterns and connections that others missed, leading to groundbreaking discoveries. The beauty of the Feynman technique is that it helps you build these mental models more effectively. By actively simplifying and teaching concepts, you create frameworks that allow you to approach new challenges with greater ease and clarity. These mental models not only make learning more efficient, but also help you think more critically and creatively. The first step in adopting the Feynman technique as a regular habit is to recognize when you're faced with complex ideas or problems that need simplification. This can be difficult at first, especially when we are so used to approaching information as a whole or diving directly into technical details. But the key to making the Feynman technique effective is recognizing that complexity is often a barrier to understanding, and simplicity is the gateway to clarity. When encountering a new subject or challenge, it's easy to become overwhelmed by the amount of information or the technical jargon involved. Whether it's a business strategy, a scientific theory, or a personal project, our natural tendency might be to rush through the information, assuming that the more we know, the more we understand. But this approach often leads to confusion rather than clarity. To recognize complexity, start by asking yourself, do I understand this fully? If the answer is no, then the material is likely too complex for you at this moment, and you need to simplify it. Look for areas where you feel uncertain or confused. These are often the signs that the concept is not yet fully understood. The Feynman technique encourages you to confront this uncertainty by breaking things down and explaining them in simpler terms. For instance, if you're working on a project with multiple stakeholders and find yourself bogged down by the details, stop and take a step back. Identify the core elements of the project. What is the goal? Who are the key players? And what needs to be accomplished? Explain the project to yourself or a colleague in the simplest terms. You'll find that by stripping away the noise, the solution often becomes clearer. The habit of recognizing complexity and simplifying it is crucial to mastering the Feynman technique. It forces you to engage with the material and ask deeper questions, leading to a more profound understanding of the subject at hand. Once you've recognized when a concept needs simplifying, the next step is to begin practicing the Feynman technique regularly in everyday situations. The beauty of this technique is its versatility. It can be applied to nearly every area of your life, from professional tasks to personal growth and learning. Whether you are learning a new skill, tackling a work-related problem, or solving a personal dilemma, the Feynman technique can help you think more clearly and break down complex issues into manageable parts. Start small. The Feynman technique is not just for studying or solving major problems. It can be used for everyday tasks, too. For example, imagine you're learning how to cook a complicated recipe. Instead of getting overwhelmed by the many ingredients and cooking techniques involved, break the recipe down into its core components. What's the basic goal? What's the key cooking method? Now, explain it to yourself in simple terms. I need to chop the vegetables, saute them, and then add them to the sauce to simmer. This approach turns a seemingly overwhelming task into an easy-to-follow step-by-step process. In the workplace, the Feynman technique can be incredibly effective when faced with challenging projects or complex concepts. For instance, if you're learning about a new software tool or strategy, try breaking it down into basic components. Focus on understanding the core functions before moving on to more advanced features. Then, explain the tool to a colleague or even to yourself. This helps reinforce your understanding and ensures that you fully grasp the material before moving forward. The key to making the Feynman technique a habit is consistency. By using it in everyday situations, you develop the skill of simplifying complex problems automatically. Over time, this habit will become second nature, and you'll find that it not only improves your understanding, but also enhances your problem-solving ability and decision-making skills. As with any habit, building consistency with the Feynman technique requires perseverance. In the beginning, you may encounter resistance, whether it's the temptation to skip the process, doubts about its effectiveness, or the discomfort of confronting gaps in your knowledge. However, the key to mastering the Feynman technique is overcoming this resistance and sticking with it until it becomes a natural part of your intellectual process. One of the first hurdles you may face is the temptation to take shortcuts. It's easy to assume that you already understand something because you've seen it before or because it seems familiar. However, the Feynman technique requires you to break down every concept to its basics, even if it seems like you already know it. This may feel redundant or time-consuming, but remember that true understanding comes from actively engaging with the material, not just skimming through it. If you feel resistance to simplifying a concept, remind yourself of the benefits. When you take the time to break something down and explain it in your own words, you gain a deeper and more solid understanding of it. It's this process of simplification that allows you to truly grasp the material and apply it effectively in the future. Over time, this deeper understanding will make everything you learn much easier to retain and recall. Another challenge is the discomfort of realizing you don't fully understand something. When you use the Feynman technique and find that you struggle to explain a concept, it's easy to feel frustrated or discouraged. However, this is precisely the moment where learning happens. The gaps you uncover show you where to focus your efforts next. Embrace these moments of struggle, because they are signs of progress. By confronting these gaps and actively seeking to fill them, you're developing a much stronger, more lasting understanding. To build consistency with the Feynman technique, start by setting small goals. Use it daily in small tasks. Whether it's explaining a piece of information at work, teaching yourself a new skill, or simply reviewing a concept you've learned. Over time, this practice will become more natural and effortless, and you'll find yourself using the technique automatically, even without thinking. Track your progress by noting how your understanding of concepts improves over time. Reflect on the clarity you've gained and how simplifying ideas has helped you solve problems more effectively. Consistency, combined with a commitment to simplifying and explaining concepts, will ensure that the Feynman technique becomes an invaluable habit in your intellectual toolkit. The Feynman technique is not just a method for learning, it's a lifelong habit that can improve mental clarity, problem solving, and decision-making in every area of life. By recognizing complexity, simplifying concepts, and consistently applying the technique, you'll develop a deeper understanding of any subject, whether it's related to work, personal growth, or learning new skills. The habit of simplifying complex ideas becomes second nature over time, leading to more efficient and effective thinking. As you continue to build this habit, you'll find that the Feynman technique not only enhances your intellectual capabilities, but also transforms the way you approach challenges and solve problems. This chapter has provided actionable steps for incorporating the Feynman technique into your daily routine. By recognizing complex ideas and simplifying them, practicing the technique regularly, and overcoming resistance, you can make this technique an integral part of your intellectual life. In the next chapter, we'll review how adopting this technique can lead to long-term improvements in your thinking and problem-solving, and provide examples of how successful individuals use these habits to excel in their fields.